not an idiot. The library, always so neat and dry and dustless, was in shambles. The storm had shattered the windows here too. Rain and wind howled and blustered inside, soaking the books and ripping out pages and leaving puddles on the floor and bookshelves. "We've got to go," Jonathan blurted out, taking a step inside. "And you've got to come with us." "Oh," the librarian answered calmly, turning and walking slowly into his wrecked library. "I don't think so. What kind of book would you like?" No, really. We've all got to go. This is a hurricane. The whole place is flooded. The island's going under." The librarian stopped. He turned and looked at Jonathan in his hunched, twisted way. A small smile rose just barely to his lips. "Yes," he replied. "I know. It's the sea. Come at last, to claim her own." "Then come on. We've got to get out, to higher ground." The librarian chuckled. "Yes," he said. "You do. The sea is coming." He reached up and stroked 99's dripping fur. "But I am staying." "You'll die," Jonathan insisted. The librarian shrugged. "I have lived long enough. I have never left this island. Where else would I go?" Jonathan shook his head and just stammered, No, but... And the librarian turned, looked out at the storm through his narrow, shattered windows. "You must take the other boys, higher, to the only part of Slab Henge that will last." "What? Where is that?" "The old lighthouse. Up, up, up. Above the Admiral's room. The lighthouse was here first, before the asylum, before the school. It is built on the original stone, the true stone of the old island. The rest..." He spread his arms to include the windswept stone structure around him. "The rest is all built on sand, but the lighthouse will stand." "Come on, Jonathan," Colin whispered. "We have to go." Jonathan nodded his head. There was something the librarian had said that stuck in his mind. "You must take the other boys." "You know," he said, looking at the librarian in his eyes. "You know about the Admiral, about the grown-ups." The man's small smile just grew a bit. "I am a lunatic, not an idiot. I go at night to the kitchen. It's been terribly messy." The librarian paused, working his fingers into 99's fur. 99 closed his eyes and leaned back into the scratching finger. "And ice cream is my favourite food. It's kept in the freezer, of course." "We didn't kill them. It was lightning. They were all outside, standing in a puddle. The Admiral had a sword in the air." "The Admiral," the librarian said thoughtfully, "was a madman, standing around in a puddle, holding a metal sword in the air during a lightning storm. Sounds about right. For him, anyway." The librarian nodded and looked to the nearest shelf. "Now, you must go, quickly, so we need to choose a book first." No, I really can't take one. We have to swim to get back. It'll get wet." His eyes still on the book's spines. "All of these books will be at the bottom of the sea very soon, and you cannot leave a library without a book. Ah, here, this one." The old man pulled a book off the shelf. It was thick and bound in soft black leather. "Moby Dick, the story of a madman lost at sea. He dies in a storm. The hero is the only one who lives." The librarian handed the book to Jonathan and squinted up sideways at him. "I don't think that is what will happen here. No, you will save them, Jonathan. Now go. Go to the lighthouse." Jonathan breathed quickly through his nose. "Are you sure?" "Oh yes, just go." Jonathan looked into the librarian's eyes. "Thank you," he said. Jonathan turned to go. Wait, there is one thing you could do for me." "What?" The librarian reached up and plucked the monstrous rat from his shoulder. He pressed his lips for a long moment into the rodent's neck, then held him out with 2 hands toward Jonathan. "Take 99 with you. You could save him, like the others." Jonathan gulped. The rat looked at him with curious shining eyes, but he didn't hiss or snarl. Jonathan handed Moby Dick to Colin and reached out reluctantly to take the offered animal. 99 was surprisingly soft, unpredictably heavy. The rat sniffed for a second at Jonathan's hands, then scrambled gently up to perch on his shoulder. The librarian watched. His eyes were wet and glowing. "Yes, you can save him. And maybe when you're home, Jonathan, find him a wife." Jonathan nodded. "Sure, a nice big wife. Yes, that's right. Now off you go. Take a candle. I won't be needing them at the bottom of the sea." Colin grabbed a candle from atop the closest bookshelf and the two boys ran out into the corridor. Jonathan looked back once to see the librarian standing in the doorway with the door wide open. He was lit from behind by a few flickering candles. His hair whipped about by the wind. Rats were swarming through the open door by his feet, seeking the light and relative dryness of the library. Several of them had no tails. The old man had made no move to stop them. He wouldn't die alone. Jonathan followed the light of Colin's candle through the hallways. The water was above their ankles now. They arrived panting at the stairs that led down past the hatch. The water was rising and falling and swirling, lapping at every top of the steps. It would be a longer swim this time, and now he had a rat too. What do we do? We swim, Colin, Jonathan said. That's how I got through. Just a quick dip down and then up again. No big deal. What about the candle? Don't worry about that. There's a lit lantern on the other side. Just take a deep breath. Jonathan handed 99 over before Colin could think to push it away. He dropped Moby Dick with a splash at his feet. Can't believe I'm doing this, Jonathan said. He tucked his shirt into his pants tightly, then unbuttoned the top two buttons. Taking the rat back from Colin, he slid him into his shirt against his bare skin, and he rebuttoned his shirt. The rat scratched and writhed against his body, squeaking and squirming. Come on, before he chews through my stomach! And without thinking, Jonathan dove head first, pushing off the top step as hard as he could to rocket himself through the water. As soon as the cold water hit them, 99 went crazy. He tore and fought and twisted, and Jonathan gritted his teeth and swam as hard as he could, pouring and kicking at the black water. He didn't slow down when an upwelling of water pressed him against the ceiling. He didn't slow when the rat's teeth sank into his skin. He didn't slow when he saw through the salty murk the glow of the lantern light up ahead. He didn't slow until his feet found the far stairs and his head broke into air and he stepped up out of the water. He climbed a few steps up. 99 was shaking and coughing inside his shirt. He struggled weakly against the wet fabric. Jonathan unbuttoned his shirt and pulled the bedraggled rat out. 99 coughed up some water and then slowly crawled back up to Jonathan's shoulder, his body shaking. Jonathan gave him a reassuring scratch. Colin's head popped up into the stairwell, gasping for air. Jonathan helped him up the slippery stairs, pulling the lantern from the hook. They stood panting, eyes on the dark water they'd just emerged from. Well, Colin gasped, that wasn't the... His words were cut off by a wrenching, grating crack from below the water's surface. A great rush of huge bubbles rose to the surface, and with a sickening whoosh, the water began to rise more quickly, so quickly that they could see it climbing and racing up the stairs in a rapid, steady surge. What happened? Colin cried, stumbling backward up the stairs. I don't know. I think something else just broke open. We've got to go. We've got to get out of here. The water rose up the stairs faster than they could climb, nearly overtaking them before they reached the top. By the time they broke out into the hallway, the water was a surging wave that came nearly to their waists. Together they ran through the familiar hallways they both knew, winding back toward the dining room. The dark wall of water gurgled just behind them, slurping at the walls and sloshing around corners. 99 clung to Jonathan's shoulders with a firm grip of his claws. His tail slapped on Jonathan's back as they ran. They burst into the dining room just ahead of the wave. They almost ran into Sebastian and the rest of the boys. They were all crowded around the door, holding lanterns and candles. Sebastian was at the front, his sword out in front of him, and a coil of rope thrown over his shoulder, a dark look on his face. The wave of water was slowed when it hit the narrow doorway. It crested and poured into the dining room, a frothy white head of bubbles at its top. Colin and Jonathan braced themselves as it hit their backs. Some of the boys who weren't ready were knocked off their feet and were sent tumbling head over heels into the water. The water pouring in from the doorway levelled out as the water in the room rose, until it all stood flat, just above their knees. But still, it was slowly rising. The boys regathered themselves, coughing and rubbing the water out of their eyes. Sebastian had never lost his footing. He still stood with his sword, eyes on Jonathan. We were just about to leave, he said. Where were you guys going? Sebastian looked him in the eye. We were coming to find you. Really? Sebastian shrugged, just nodded. Yeah. Ah, thanks. Oh my goodness, Sebastian shrugged again. What is that thing on your shoulder? It's a rat, Jonathan said. Don't worry about it. We've got to go, quick, or we're all going to die. Where are we going? To the lighthouse. What lighthouse? I'll explain as we go, but we've got to move, and we've got to move now. Jonathan started to brush past him, but Sebastian put a hand out and stopped him. Easy, Johnny. I don't want to get blamed for you dying. Doesn't mean I want you in charge. We decided to stay here where it's safe. But it isn't safe here, Sebastian. The whole place is going under. The water's rising and the island is sinking. We've got to go. We've got to go up. Up? It's safer down here, Sebastian insisted. What if the tower blows over? Gerald asked. What if lightning hits it? Francis demanded. Going up is our only choice. It's the only way to save ourselves, Jonathan insisted. You can't trust him. Benny's voice was ugly and hissing. You know what he's here for. Lightning flashed through the windows. The wind was a roar swirling around them. Jonathan saw the boys' faces harden at Benny's words, saw the doubt flicker in their eyes. You're wrong, Benny. You can trust me. My sister. She did die in a fire, but... Jonathan stopped. His voice was choked by tears. But you didn't start it, Colin finished, did you? Stop it, Colin, Jonathan said, but Colin didn't stop. You told me, Jonathan. You told me she took your matches. Jonathan swallowed, took a choking breath. He looked into Colin's face, and Colin's eyes widened. Oh, he breathed. It was her, wasn't it? Your sister. Your sister started the fire. Shut up, Colin. And you took the blame. You let them think it was you because it's my fault, Jonathan interrupted, shouting. They were my matches. She learned from me. Jonathan's voice broke off, his shoulders shaking with sobs. 99's paws dug in harder to stay on Jonathan. He closed his eyes against his tears and lowered his head. It's just my fault. He heard through the storm in his own sadness. How did you get the scars? Colin asked. Jonathan didn't answer. How did you get the scars? Colin asked again. Then in a whisper, so low only Jonathan could hear it, he added, Tell them, Jonathan. If you tell them, they'll believe you. They'll follow you. You can save them. Jonathan took one breath, then another. He opened his eyes, he lifted his head. I didn't start the fire, he said. I didn't start the fire. I woke up and I heard her screaming, and I ran downstairs, but the fire was too big. It was too hot. I couldn't get to her. I tried so hard. He held up his arms and the scar tissue twisted and tough flashed whitely in the lightning. I tried until the firefighters got there and dragged me away. I did everything I could to save her. I did everything I could. Tears now joined the seawater on his face. Warm tears, clean and true. Walter walked up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, man. It's okay. Jonathan took a deep, steadying breath, nodded a thank you to Walter and to Colin, and looked at the other boys. We've got to get to the only part of this place that's built on rock, the only part that isn't going to wash away. We've got to get to the old lighthouse. His words hung like a tattered flag in the windswept room. He's telling the truth, a deep voice interjected, and they all turned to look to where Patrick sat, still tied to his chair, but now atop one of the dining room tables. About the lighthouse. There did used to be one here, going way back now to the old sailing days. It's built on the stones, indeed. Jonathan looked at Sebastian. We need to go, Sebastian. Sebastian's jaw was clenched. What about your boat? He asked Patrick. No way, Patrick said. It's too late for that. I barely made it out here and the storm's only gotten stronger. Sebastian bit at his lips. His eyes cut to Jonathan and he just nodded. Jonathan blew out a deep breath. He nodded back. Then he turned to Roger and Gregory. Cut him loose, he said, and all of you, follow me. Without waiting for an answer, Jonathan waded through the waist-deep water past Sebastian, past the waiting boys, towards the staircase that led up towards Sebastian's room, the Admiral's room, the lighthouse. Colin followed him. 99 clung to Jonathan's shoulder. When he got to the stairwell, he stopped and turned. The boys were filing after them, all of them. They looked lost and frightened in the raging wind and the flashbulb lightning. They were drenched, exhausted, terrified. They needed to be saved. Sebastian was up on the table, sawing at Patrick's ropes with his sword. He didn't look terrifying. He looked like a confused kid finding his way through the dark. Jonathan felt something bump him and looked down. It was a piece of the ruined sinner's sorrow bobbing in the water. Several more pieces floated around him. He picked up a piece. Everyone grab a piece, he said. We're going to need the wood. The storm was like a beast now, hammering its slab hinge. Even running up the stone stairwell, they could hear it outside, through the walls, howling to be let in. Jonathan ran past the doors to the grown-ups' rooms, past the locked door to the Admiral's office, to the far dark end of the hall. The end of the hallway was a curved wall, crumbling with age. It was made of a different stone than the rest of Slabhenge, bigger blocks of greyer rock that looked even older than the rock Jonathan had grown used to being surrounded by. In the curved wall of ancient stone was a door made of tremendously thick slats of dark wood bound together with rusty iron. The door looked like it had been opened in years. Instead of a knob, it simply had a metal latch, like a pirate's treasure chest that connected to a bolt on the stone wall. Jonathan yanked on the latch, and it opened with a protesting creak of rusty metal. He pushed on the door, and it swung slowly open. Beyond the door was a round stairwell, leading up in one direction and down in the other. Its walls and stairs were made of the same grey rock. The air smelled stale, dusty, forgotten. It was even colder in the stairwell than it was in the rest of the school. Up, Jonathan said. We've got to go up. They raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Round and round the stairwell spiralled up and up and up through the dank darkness, with all the dark world raging outside the walls. Jonathan reached the top breathless. Colin was behind him, then the rest. Sebastian was the last, behind Patrick. The top of the tower was a round room. On all sides were windows, sturdy double-paned glass, crisscrossed by metal bars. The lightning filled the sky all around them. They were surrounded by the storm, teetering in the angry heavens. On all sides were windows to the black clouds of whipping wind and sideways rain. In the middle of the room, on a raised stone landing, was a great black iron bowl, big enough for Jonathan to have stretched out and lain down in. A massive curved mirror stood on the far side of the bowl, mounted on a mechanism of gears and bars and wheels that circled the bowl. To Jonathan's right was a large metal handle. "The lighthouse," Jonathan whispered. Just like he said. The boys stood in silence, looking out the windows at the hurricane that raged all around them, inches away. It was almost deafening. They could see all of Slabhenge when the lightning flashed. The courtyard flooded now halfway up the windows into the dining room. The boat still rocked between the walls. They could see the roof that covered the rest of the school rising and falling with the confusing ramblings. "Look!" Miguel shouted over the storm. "Look at the towers!" They all crowded to the windows. "What? What about them?" "There's only 3 now. One's missing." They all looked and saw it then. The far tower was gone, simply gone. They could see where the stone walls led to the space that it should occupy, but the walls stopped in a jagged, sawtooth break. A loose pile of stones was all that remained for the tower, avalanching down into the white-capped sea. Jonathan looked at Colin. Colin was staring at the pile of rubble with wide eyes. It was Colin's tower. The tower with his mattress and his papers and his 3 lonely candlesticks. Somewhere among those waves bobbed dozens of white paper cranes, and a few shiny gold chocolate wrappers too. "There! Look at the gate!" They all spun back to the courtyard with its ghostly boat. The far side with the watery stairs and the great gate through which they had all entered Slabhenge was crumbling before their very eyes. The arch above the gate crashed into the water with a massive splash. The gigantic waves poured relentlessly through the gap, pushing and pulling at the 100-year-old walls. They fell apart, stone block by stone block, as the water coursed through. Soon the whole wall was gone, a heaped mound of stones just below the water's surface. The courtyard was left with walls on only 3 sides. With the one wall gone, the waves rushed unhindered into the courtyard, rising above the level of the dining room windows. It wouldn't be long before the rest of the walls succumbed to the ravenous, storm-fueled waters of the sea. "The whole dining room's under now," Walter said. His voice was hollow with shock. "The kitchen," Tony said. "The freezer," David added. They all stood and stared. "We should light the lighthouse," Jonathan said, watching Slabhenge fall apart. But no one heard him over the wind and thunder in their own open-mouthed amazement. "We should light the lighthouse," Jonathan shouted with stricken faces. "Why?" "Well, so that they know that we're here, so they send help." He looked into Colin's eyes, then Walter's, then Patrick's. "I want to go home." His voice cracked at the end and got lost in the mad confusion of noise. He said it again from the bottom of his lungs. "I want to go home." "If you light it, they'll know to come," Patrick yelled. "When they can, anyway. This old thing ain't been fired up since before I was born. They'll notice it for sure, and they'll know to come." Jonathan ran to a large bin that lined one of the walls and threw open the lid with all his strength. "We need paper," he shouted. "The school office is under water by now," Benny yelled back. "Well, what about the Admiral's room?" They all looked at Sebastian. He shook his head. "Not in there. He didn't even have a book." Jonathan's mind flashed. "The Admiral's office. It's locked, remember?" Jonathan smiled, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out the rusty metal key that had fallen out of the dead Admiral's jacket. Sebastian's mouth dropped open. "Come on," Sebastian said to him, tossing the piece of sinner's sorrow into the great iron bowl. "The rest of you, get the wood in the fire pit." Jonathan and Sebastian ran back down the lighthouse stairs. When they got to the old door, Jonathan swore. There was an inch of water running like a river down the stairwell, pouring in from the hallway. The water was even higher than he'd imagined. It was already to the second story. "We've got to hurry. This whole place is going to fill up and fall down." They bolted down the hall, their feet splashing through the rushing water. At the door to Admiral's office, Jonathan held the lantern up and stabbed the key into the lock. It clicked into place and turned. The water rushed in with them. The office was lost in shadows, but Jonathan remembered it vividly from the first awful night. The Admiral's sneering voice, his demonic eyebrows, the pain of the sinner's sorrow, the letter home that was full of lies. The Admiral's acidic words as he'd read Jonathan's paperwork. "You have done terrible things, haven't you, Jonathan Grisby?" He remembered all of that. Jonathan walked straight over to the standing file behind the desk where he'd seen the Admiral tuck his folder. He set the lantern down and grabbed half of the folders, then handed them to Sebastian. He tucked the other half under his arms and picked up the lantern. "This should be enough," he said, and they darted back out into the hallway. The water was even higher now. Jonathan winced and dodged a dead rat being washed down the hallway. Another one bobbed by, paws stuck out, stiff into the air. At the top of the lighthouse, the other boys and Patrick had half the wood piled in the big metal bowl with the ravaged remains of the sinner's sorrow. They stood waiting on the raised platform around it, looking out at the world gone mad. Only 2 towers were now still standing, and the lighthouse. Another of the courtyard's walls was mostly gone. Jonathan looked at the name on top file in his hands, Walter Holcomb. He handed the folder to Walter. Reginald Miller was the next one, and he gave it to Reggie. Sebastian started to do the same. Eventually, Jonathan was left with one folder in his hands. Jonathan Grisby, it said. He opened it, and words from the top page jumped out at him. Guilty, criminal, arson. He ground his teeth together, crumpled the paper into a ball. He stepped forward and shoved it under the waiting pile of wood. He looked at the second sheet. More words swam up through the darkness and lightning. Death, Sophia, injuries, grief, guilt. Tears scalded his eyes, his lungs shivered as they breathed. Around him, the other boys started doing the same. Eventually, they all stood, hands clean and empty. Beneath the ready logs was tucked a white mound of twisted paper, a crumpled pile of crimes, a bonfire's worth of guilt and punishment and dark history. Sebastian frowned. He leaned back. He looked at Jonathan. Lightning flickered, showing his flooded eyes. I don't want to go home, he said. Jonathan blinked but didn't answer. You want to know why I never wrote letters? Sebastian asked. Because there's no one to send them to. I got no parents, I got no family. I've spent my whole life in places like this, or orphanages, group homes, foster homes. I don't have anyone to read my letters. No one cares. I've got no one to write to. Jonathan swallowed and took a step closer to Sebastian. You can write to me, he said. Sebastian's mouth opened, but he didn't say anything. Gerald then said, You can write to me. Walter called out, You can write to me, man. Hey, you can write to me, Sebastian, Colin said, just loud enough to be heard. Sebastian sniffed. He nodded, looked around, rubbed his eyes with his sleeve. Light the fire, Jonathan said. Sebastian nodded again. Other boys stepped forward, then with their own candles, holding the flames to the papers closer to themselves. The papers flared and burned into bright flashes of yellow. The boys stepped back and covered their eyes. There was a crackle and a snap as a piece of wood caught fire. A couple of wisping sparks rose up and flickered out. With a final flurry of crackling, the whole pile caught fire. Flames arced and danced 6 feet high. The round room, hemmed in on all sides by the stormy world's fury, grew brighter than daylight. Jonathan stepped to the metal hand crank and muscled it into motion. With a shuddering, squeaking creak, the gears and wheels attached to the mirror sprang to reluctant life. Sebastian joined him at the crank and they worked together. The mirror moved faster, sending its spear of light out into the darkness. After a while, Jonathan let go and stepped back, sweating and gasping. Another boy quickly took his place. He leaned back against a low wall beneath the windows. Oh, the fire felt good. He closed his eyes and didn't try to stop the tears that seeped out between his eyelids, running in warm paths down his face. They ran down his cheeks and over his lips, which opened into a wide smile, tasting their saltiness. He laughed as the tears poured from his eyes. Colin walked over and stood beside him. The giant rat was still sat on his shoulder, sniffing in the smoky air. "Why are you laughing like that?" he asked. Jonathan laughed and sobbed at the same time and looked at the beautiful fire through the blur of his tears. "Because I want to go home," he answered. "Then why are you crying?" Colin asked again. Jonathan didn't wipe at the tears. He let them burn in his eyes until they were full and flooded out. "Because I want to go home," he said. "I really just want to go home."